iView.
Today, the LNP's David Crisafulli set to become Queensland's 41st Premier after Stephen Miles concedes defeat.
We took a comprehensive plan to the election and they backed it in.
Police investigate a fight in Geelong, which left a young man dead and 2 people in hospital. Iran is being urged to not retaliate after Israeli strikes killed 4 soldiers in a growing tit-for-tat conflict. And bearing all in the name of art, thousands line Brisbane's Story Bridge for a Spencer Tunick photo shoot. Hello and welcome to ABC News. I'm David Chau. Former Queensland Premier Stephen Miles has called Premier-elect David Crisafulli this morning to concede the state election. Our reporter Jack Mackay joins us now from Brisbane. Hello there, Jack. We've heard from both leaders today. What's the state of play and what have they had to say?
Well, as you just said there, David, the outgoing Premier, Stephen Miles, has called the new Premier, David Crisafulli, to concede defeat. Stephen Miles visited Government House today, where he officially tendered his resignation ahead of the new Premier, David Crisafulli, being sworn in tomorrow. David Crisafulli addressed the media this morning. He's already got down to business. He had a chat with Prime Minister Anthony Albanese over the phone. That was about a 20-minute conversation, he said. And attention is now turning to his cabinet as to who will be in that cabinet. Ahead of this election, he'd indicated that all of his shadow ministers would be part of that cabinet. He now has left the door open to a reshuffle. As for the outgoing Premier, Stephen Miles, he says that he would like to stay on as Labor leader and lead the party in opposition. He has the support already of senior ministers, including the outgoing Treasurer, Cameron Dick, and the outgoing Health Minister, Shannon Fentiman. And here's more of what both leaders said today.
We took a comprehensive plan to the election. Queenslanders saw it and they backed it in. And they backed it in record numbers. And we remain focused on the issues that we campaigned on because they are the issues that Queenslanders told us about, that they wanted action over a 4-year period. It's been a tough 4 years. Opposition is a place where it's a long road. And the work that they displayed, I'm eternally grateful for, but the real gratitude is for the discipline we displayed. I think even my harshest of critics would acknowledge that the discipline and unity of our team over a long period in opposition is something that stands us in good stead to be a good government.
The result last night was much better than expected, but clearly nowhere near sufficient for a Labor victory. I'm very proud of the campaign that I ran and the government that I've led these last 10 months, but at the end of the day, clearly Queenslanders for some time have wanted to see change of government, and that's what the result of yesterday's election will be.
And Jack, it's pretty rare for the LNP to be in power in Queensland. So what can we expect from David Crisafulli's government?
You're right. This is just the second time that the Conservative side of politics has won a state election in Queensland since 1986. David Crisafulli's got a busy 100 days ahead of him. Within the first 100 days, he's promised to commission a review into Olympic Games infrastructure to consider what stadiums will be involved for that event when Brisbane hosts the 2032 Games. And when it comes to crime, he's promised a number of changes. Among them is introducing what he's called adult crime, adult time. That would see children or juvenile offenders sentenced as adults for serious offences such as murder and manslaughter. He's promised to have those laws in place by Christmas.
And the other big story of the night was the Greens. They didn't do as well as they were hoping, hey?
No, they haven't. They managed to hold on to about a 9% primary vote across the state, but they've actually lost a seat overnight. So they initially held the seat of South Brisbane. That was held by the Greens' Amy McMahon, but Labor last night won that seat. And in their second seat in Queensland, that's Maiwar, they're still in a tight contest there. The incumbent MP, Michael Berkman, is still narrowly ahead in that contest. So not a great night for the Greens as they lost a seat in Parliament.
Today, we could have a minority arrangement where Labor was working with the Greens to actually make these policies happen. And instead, they've thrown that possibility away and handed the keys to 1 William Street to David Crisafulli.
That's the Greens' Michael Berkman there. He is still trailing. He's still waiting for the result in his seat of Maiwar today.
Jack, thanks a lot for bringing us this update.
Thanks, David.
Now, one of the federal coalition's most senior figures says he expects the LNP to work with them on nuclear power should Peter Dutton win the next election. The federal coalition wants to build 2 nuclear power plants in Queensland, something the new LNP government doesn't currently support. Our political reporter Tom Lowry has more.
This was a bit of a story of the Queensland election campaign. The LNP currently has this position that it's opposed to nuclear power. They say it's not part of their energy plan for Queensland, and they insisted that wouldn't change should the coalition win office. Of course, the coalition, the federal coalition, is taking a policy to the next federal election to open 7 nuclear power plants around the country, including 2 in Queensland, which raised the question of how the federal and state parties would manage that obvious conflict should they both wind up in government together at some point down the track. Now, as I mentioned, the LNP in Queensland insists it wouldn't be changing its stance. That has been its position in the past. But the Nationals leader, David Littleproud, says that should the federal coalition, Peter Dutton and his team, take this policy to a federal election and win, they would have a mandate from the people, and that should be respected by state governments around the country, including Queensland. And he says with David Crisafulli and the LNP in power in Queensland, that should be a smoother process. Here's a bit of what he had to say on this earlier today.
If we get that mandate from the Australian people, you've got to appreciate that we have to set an energy grid for the East Coast and South Australia and Tasmania, and we need all the states, no matter their political persuasions, to respect the decision of the Australian people. And if Peter Dutton and I get that mandate, we are going to get on with the job. And I would think that because of our relationship with David Crisafulli, we're going to get better results.
And Tom, federal Labor is putting a pretty positive spin on last night's Queensland election results, isn't it?
Yeah, which is interesting because it wasn't a great night for Labor, at least by the numbers. Labor suffered a 7.3% swing against it, 11 seats lost. Of course, they lost government. The LNP is forming majority government, despite those suggestions that the polls were tightening towards the end there and we could be headed for a minority result. But some senior Labor figures, up to and including the Prime Minister, have been out today trying to put a somewhat positive spin on last night's result. Anthony Albanese saying that Stephen Miles did a good job as leader, that Labor, other figures like Murray Watt saying that Labor will be able to form a fairly solid opposition given the numbers they have retained up there in Queensland. They're also pointing to the result from the Greens that Alex mentioned just before, saying there's some real green shoots there for Labor, at least in its campaign, to win some of those seats currently held by the Greens in Brisbane. Before the last federal election, those 3 Green seats, 2 were held by the LNP, 1 by Labor. Labor has its sights on all 3. Of course, the coalition has its sights on the 2 that they lost as well. With those Greens, with the Greens vote falling in this state election, particularly around that inner Brisbane area, Labor really has its sights on perhaps taking back those. Here's a bit of what Anthony Albanese had to say on this earlier today.
Stephen Miles ran an effective and vigilant and courageous campaign. He was always against the odds, but the outcome was much better for Queensland Labor than what was anticipated just weeks ago, let alone months ago, with the retaining of seats that were seen to be under threat, but also gaining a seat off the Greens political party, I think sends a message as well that people who elected Greens Party representatives to state and federal parliament expected them to play a progressive role, not to play a blocking role.
So, David, that's about as positive a spin as you could put on what was a not insignificant election defeat. Anthony Albanese finding at least some silver linings there.
Interesting times ahead. Tom, thanks for your update. Police in Victoria are investigating the death of a 20-year-old man who was stabbed during an alleged fight in Geelong's Party District precinct this morning. 2 other men have been treated in hospital, and our reporter Cyan Valence reports from Geelong.
Emergency services were only called here around 5:30 this morning to reports of a man with a stab wound. Paramedics arrived and tried desperately to save the man's life, taking him to Geelong Hospital with critical injuries, but unfortunately he couldn't be saved. 2 other men took themselves to hospital with non-life-threatening injuries. It's unclear exactly what their relationship is to the victim, who sadly has passed away. It sparked an extensive crime scene here in Geelong's city centre. It stretches for 500 metres from near where we understand the man stopped all the way to the highway, and it's horrific. There is a trail of blood for hundreds of metres. The homicide squad and forensic officers arrived when the sun rose this morning, and they're trying to piece together exactly what happened here. But surrounding businesses say events like this are all too common, and that every week there is an assault or a glassing, and they say there needs to be more of a police presence here in the party area, especially on Friday and Saturday nights. So there have been no arrests or charges in this case so far, but it is still very early on, and police are trying to figure out exactly what led up to this 20-year-old man's death as his family tragically wake to the news that he has died. David.
A tragic incident. Cyan, thank you for bringing us this story. Victoria Police suspect that a shop fire in Melbourne's outer north could be connected with a string of fire bombings linked to the illicit tobacco trade. Police say a vehicle smashed into the store at Mickleham before the business was set alight on Enderby Drive shortly before 1:30 this morning. No one was inside at the time. Investigators are calling for witnesses or anyone who has CCTV or dashcam footage of the incident to come forward. US President Joe Biden says he's hoping Israel's latest attack on Iran marks the end of the military exchanges between the 2 regional rivals. Mr. Biden says it appears Israel only struck military targets during yesterday's attack. These retaliatory strikes have raised fears about the Middle East conflict escalating even further.
Iran went to intelligence community for the last half hour, 3.5 hours. It looks like they didn't hit anything other than military targets. My hope is this is the end.
President, did you get a heads up from Israel on the Iran strike? Did you get any heads up?
Yes.
Meanwhile, the Iranian government appears to be downplaying the impact of missile attacks from Israel to avoid having to retaliate. Our Middle East correspondent Eric Torchek reports.
What's been reported is that Israel attacked Iran in 3 waves. The first took out air defences in Syria and Iraq to clear the way for other waves of strikes. Then Iranian defences were targeted, and then Iranian long-range missile manufacturing sites were struck. Apparently around 20 targets were struck in 3 Iranian provinces, one site near the capital, Tehran. The Iranian government has described the damage as limited, but that's unlikely to be true. We've seen just how strong the Israeli Air Force is. We've seen how high their capabilities are, and there's no reason Israel wouldn't have taken an opportunity to diminish Iran's military capacity in some way. Nevertheless, Israel says its action is over, and it looks like Iran is doing what Israel and the United States have urged it to do, which is take this hit and walk away. Iranian officials, the kind of language they're using suggests they're looking for a way to avoid having to retaliate and continue this escalatory cycle. They say that while they're prepared to defend Iran, in all cases, Iran takes seriously its broader responsibilities towards peace and security in the region. That's a very de-escalatory statement, and it suggests that Iran is looking for a way out of this. But the fact that this round is over doesn't necessarily leave the region any safer. Iran and Israel are now the closest they have ever been to all-out war. And of course, the fighting is continuing and in some elements is worse than ever in Gaza and in Lebanon, where Iran has a very direct interest and long-term investment. That means these two enemies could likely find a new reason to strike each other again soon.
Now, turning to Asia, emergency teams in the Philippines are still trying to reach people swept away in a tropical storm that has already killed at least 80 people. Storm Trami made landfall on Thursday, bringing high winds and floods to a large area south of the capital, Manila. Some regions saw more than 2 months' worth of rain in just 24 hours. And for more on the situation in the Philippines, I'm joined by Jen Mendoza, who's the Humanitarian Partnerships Manager at CARE Philippines. Hello there, Jen. Thanks for joining us. How are the recovery... how are the recovery efforts going?
Thank you, David, for giving us this opportunity to share our situation here in the Philippines. The recovery of efforts are ongoing in the Philippines. CARE and our partner organizations in the Humanitarian Partnership Platform are conducting damage needs assessments, especially those in most affected regions. We are also mobilizing resources to assist the most affected and most vulnerable populations, especially women, girls, the elderly, and people with disabilities. At present, we have been on the ground since day one and provided hot meals to those who are in evacuation centers or are still in flooded communities. The government has also mobilized resources and have been providing immediate assistance, but the need really is very great because of the huge number of affected populations.
So are you getting enough support from the government while you're trying to help communities get back on their feet, or does a lot more need to be done?
The Department of Social Welfare and Development has coordinated the distribution of relief packs, including food, water, hygiene kits to displaced families, and have also established evacuation centers for those who are still displaced. But at present, the need is just too great for us. We need the collaboration of the government, humanitarian organizations, civil society, the private sector, and the international community to ensure the fast and timely delivery of life-saving aid reaches those who are in need of it the most.
And Jen, the devastation from this tropical storm has been quite enormous, with estimates that 300,000 people have been displaced. How long do you think it will take to recover from this?
For us, David, it's really important to note that this tropical storm is just one among the series of climate-related events that the most affected populations have experienced. They're still coming from a long drought or El Nino since late 2023, which continued until July this year. And starting September, 2 typhoons, Gemi and Yagi, have devastated the same communities that were recovering from El Nino. And farming and fishing families who are still trying to recover are now hit by these series of typhoons and storms, damaging their sources of livelihood, and can take months for them to bounce back from the devastation because this storm magnified even more the challenges that these communities remain.
Well, Jen Mendoza from CARE Philippines, thank you very much for speaking to us, and I wish you all the best with the recovery efforts.
Thank you.
Now, Arab and Muslim community leaders have endorsed Donald Trump at a rally in Michigan, which was one of the crucial swing states which brought Mr. Trump victory back in 2016. Michigan is home to the largest population of Arab Americans, where many voters are feeling frustrated with the Democrats over their handling of the war in the Middle East.
We as Muslims stand with President Trump because he promises peace. He promises peace, not war.
Meanwhile, former First Lady Michelle Obama has joined Democratic candidate Kamala Harris at her rally in Michigan. Mrs. Obama has warned a vote for Donald Trump is a vote against women's health. She's also claimed there's a double standard in how the two candidates are being treated and addressed frustrated voters who are considering abandoning Ms. Harris.
There are still folks wringing their hands, crossing their arms, tuning out, saying they plan to sit this election out to prove a point? Well, let me tell you who isn't tuning out. Many of the folks who served closest to Trump and saw the danger firsthand.
Now it's time for the latest sports headlines with Daniela Intili.
Alex de Minaur has been knocked out in the semi-finals of tennis's Vienna Open, going down in straight sets to Russia's Karen Khachanov. The Australian #1 lost 6-2, 6-4, putting a dent into his ATP finals hopes. Australian doubles duo Max Purcell and Jordan Thompson will play at the end of the season event in Turin for the first time. The pair have enjoyed a standout season, including their first major title together at this year's US Open. Carlos Sainz has edged out title rivals Max Verstappen and Lando Norris to claim pole position at Formula One's Grand Prix in Mexico City. It's the Ferrari driver's first pole position since last year's Singapore Grand Prix. Norris's Australian teammate Oscar Piastri produced the fastest lap in the final practice session, but was eliminated in the first phase of qualifying after an error due to him pushing the car too much. It means Piastri will start from 17th.
It just went off in turn 12, got beached on the curb there, and that was it. So my lap was easily going to be enough. So it's very frustrating to have made that mistake.
Manchester City has returned to the top of the English Premier League table with a 1-0 win at home over Southampton. It defeated Ipswich Town 4-3. Bournemouth drew 1-1 at Aston Villa, and Everton substitute Beto netted a stoppage time equaliser to salvage a draw against Fulham. The Wellington Phoenix have recorded their first win of the A-League men's season, beating Perth Glory 2-0 in Perth. Scott Watton and Tim Payne sealed the Phoenix's win, who have not lost to Perth since August 2020. Glory remain at the bottom of the table, having lost the opening 2 games of the season. New Melbourne Victory coach Patrick Kuznorbo claimed bragging rights against his former side in the Melbourne derby with a 3-1 win over crosstown rivals Melbourne City. The Victory made a blistering start, leading 3-0 after just 25 minutes, the quickest start by either team in the history of the Melbourne derby. The AFLW's first ever Dreamtime clash between Richmond and Essendon has ended in a dramatic draw in Darwin. Richmond skipper Katie Brennan had a chance to win it for the Tigers in the dying moments of the game, but could only register a behind to lock the scores at 6 goals, 6-42. The result drops the Tigers to 6th spot, while the Bombers cling onto 8th position. Both sides suffered injuries late in the match. Sarah Hoskins injured her knee and Steph Wales her hamstring. In Perth, a club record 6-goal haul from Irish import Ash Maloney secured a 33-point win for Geelong over West Coast, keeping the Cats' faint finals hopes alive. Reigning NBL champions, the Tasmania Jack Jumpers surrendered a 19-point lead to the Bullets, but bounced back to win 87-79 in Brisbane. Bullets captain Mitch Norton scored a game-high 20 points, while Jordan Crawford and Marjok Den both finished with 16 points for Tasmania. The Illawarra Hawks remain on top of the ladder with an 88-82 victory over South East Melbourne Phoenix. Tyler Harvey impressed for the Hawks with 22 points, including 6 three-pointers. Joe Wieskamp starred for the Phoenix with 16 points and 7 rebounds from off the bench.
Thousands of nudists have walked across the Story Bridge in Brisbane for New York-based artist Spencer Tunick. Our reporter Toby Loftus reports from Brisbane.
Organisers say 5,425 people attended the nude shoot here in Brisbane this morning. It's the brainchild of New York-based photographer Spencer Tunick, who has done shoots like this all over the world, including in places like the Sydney Opera House and Bondi Beach. This morning's shoot began at around 4:30 a.m. with thousands of people walking out and then lying down on Brisbane's iconic Story Bridge. They then moved down to the River Walk, a boardwalk that runs alongside the river, and then an alleyway behind me. Spencer Tunick says this series of photographs will be called Rising Tide, and the finished product will be released at some point in the future.
It was beautiful to see all the different types of bodies come out and participate, different tonalities, different genders. We had trans participants and non-binary and people from the LGBTQIA+ community, plus their allies. So this was the most diverse work I've ever done. I'm lucky that people want to travel to be in my work, but it's predominantly mostly the people from the city that do come. So this is a Brisbane action. Unbelievably, Brisbane is not that conservative when it comes to, real humans and the body and art.
It's time to check on the weather now with Jessica Rendall.
Hello, let's start in Queensland, where it'll be mostly sunny across the state today, apart from some isolated showers over parts of the southeast. Some possible late showers too over the far west and north. In New South Wales and the ACT, the chance of showers along the north coast with some potentially severe thunderstorms for the northern tablelands and adjacent plains. Dry and partly cloudy for the rest of the region. In Victoria, a mostly cloudy day with the chance of a shower south of the ranges, most likely over central and eastern districts. High fire danger in the northwest. Down in Tassie, those weekend showers will be easing and contracting to the west this afternoon and evening. Cloudy and a top of 21 in Hobart. Back on the mainland, South Australia can expect some isolated showers over the far north with some possible thunderstorms in the northwest. Dry and partly cloudy elsewhere. Heading west, mostly cloudy across WA's south coast with some light showers over the southern coastal areas, but those should clear by the afternoon. In the north, showers and gusty thunderstorms possible over most parts of the Kimberley and WA's northern interior. Some hot temperatures forecast too for the region, including in the Northern Territory, where it'll be mostly sunny apart from some possible showers over the top end and parts of the far south. Let's look ahead now to tomorrow's forecast for the capital cities. Brisbane is in for a wet start to the week, dry and mostly sunny in Sydney and Canberra. Partly cloudy for Melbourne, a possible shower in Hobart. Cloud clearing in Adelaide, clear skies for Perth and a shower or two for Darwin, warming up to 36 degrees there.
And that's the latest from ABC News. I'm David Chau. Thanks for tuning in.